So when we talk about internal auditing, one of the things that we want to really explain is how an internal auditor is different from external auditing. Now, you have, or you will, or maybe right now you are taking auditing, the external auditing. I think there's a couple of auditing classes. I teach the 5010, but I think there's a couple of others out there. When we talk about external auditors, we are talking about primarily the audit of the financial statement, where the external auditors are the experts in terms of the financial statement audit. They are independent, and they provide this framework for auditing the financial statement and being able to express an opinion of the financial statement. So in external auditing is narrow focus primarily in relationship to the financial statement. Now, that doesn't mean that external auditors can't do other things. And in fact, an external auditor or CPA firm may in fact be engaged to do internal auditing. But when we think about external auditing, we think about the financial statement audit, and this is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about external audits. Okay, so internal auditing. Internal auditing is independent. Okay, so let's just talk about this. So an internal auditor is independent, not because they're not working for the organization. In fact, an internal auditor actually is an employee of the same organization where they're doing audits. However, the control structure or the reporting structure is set up in such a way that the internal auditor is reporting outside the organization to the audit committee. At least this is really the way it should be set up. To maintain this level of independence, the internal audit department reports to the audit committee. This is best practices. Now, the reality is the audit committee is the framework where the audit plan is put together and decisions are made related in relationship to the audit, and audit reports are presented. But the reality is that on a day-to-day basis, is internal auditors need to get paper for their printer, they need to get things for their copy machine, they need to get paid every 2 weeks, and they need essentially everything that they need computers, they need everything that that any other employee has. So generally speaking, what you see with the internal audit department is from a leadership perspective is they report outside the organization to the audit committee, and you kind of visualize the audit committee as being a part of the board of directors. So we have the board of directors that is a separate component as compared to management. So the internal audit department is reporting to the shareholders through the internal audit or through the audit committee as opposed to through management. But from a operational perspective, they would be reporting maybe to finance or maybe to the president's office. When I worked at one hospital, I reported directly to the president from an operational perspective, but from a leadership perspective, I reported directly to the audit committee. Okay? Now this middle area here, we're talking about assurance, insight, and objectivity. Well, there's a screen here on page 1-2 of your book that talks about assurance, insight, and objectivity. Okay, so assurance services is internal audit provides assurances on the organization's governance, risk management, and control processes to help the organization achieve its strategic, operational, financial, and compliance objectives. So let's talk specifically about the assurance services that we're providing. And the way I like to illustrate this external, and we're comparing this back to the external auditor. Well, external auditors are looking at internal controls, they're looking at risk. So is internal audit. But the difference is that from an external auditor perspective, they're looking at risk primarily from the perspective of how it impacts the risk of material misstatement within the financial statements. So kind of visualize the external auditors looking at risk at a very high level. And we always use this illustration. The external auditors are looking at risk at the 30,000-foot level. So they're flying over in the airplane, and they're looking at pockets of risk as they relate to the risk of material misstatement. And again, materiality in a large organization may be in the millions of dollars. Okay. Internal audit is in the bushes. So instead of being at the 30,000-foot level, they're at the 10-foot level. They're looking at a specific department, at a specific business group, and they're looking at internal controls, but not only internal controls as they relate to financial reporting, but also internal controls as it relates to compliance issues, and internal controls as it relates to efficiency. So in fact, what we're looking at from an operational perspective is secondary as these things relate to the financial statements, but primarily how the organization is working from an efficiency and effectiveness perspective. So we're asking the question, are we doing things right? And we're also asking the question, are we doing the right things? So the external auditor, again, expressing an opinion of the financial statement. Internal auditors, we're actually coming in there and we're looking at the organization, and we have the ability to say, hey, wait a minute, you're not doing things right. You really need to change your course in regards to the overall process. And a well-structured, well-defined, well-respected internal audit department actually has the clout and the ability to make changes in the organization. And we'll talk about how we're actually making changes, because we're really making changes basically indirectly, because if we're responsible for the change, we're going to lose our independence. Okay. The other thing is insight. Internal audit is a catalyst for improving the organization's effectiveness and efficiency by providing insights and recommendations based on our analysis and assessment of data and business processes. So as we go into an audit, let's say we're auditing the purchasing department, or we're auditing and I've looked at the billing in an outpatient surgery department. I've looked at audit in terms of patient processing in an outpatient or in an inpatient setting. So the scope of the audit doesn't necessarily need to be financial. The scope of the audit is, in most cases, going to be operational. How can we actually impact the operation of the organization? So in any event, we're looking at the effectiveness and the efficiency of whatever it is group that we're looking at, and we're looking at it in such a way that we're trying to improve the organization. Now, we're going to talk, not tonight, but we're going to talk later on in terms of what we call an enterprise risk management process. And an enterprise risk management process is we are defining the areas where we're looking at based upon the risks to the overall risks to the organization. So there's a systematic approach in terms of identifying risks and how we're actually going to address these. The last piece is objectivity, and objectivity deals with the commitment to integrity and accountability. Internal audit provides value to governing bodies and senior management as an objective, sound source of independent advice. Now, I will tell you that based upon my many years of auditing, is that I've worked with audit departments where, in fact, there is an extremely high level of respect for the internal audit department. And respect, but not fear. The idea being that when the internal audit department works with this functional group, is that there's a respect in the sense that we know what we're doing, and we are going to work with them in terms of providing a framework for improving the operation. Or we come in and we look at the operation and we say, you know what, you guys are doing a good job. And if we say a department is doing a good job, that truly means something to senior management. If we say they're doing a good job and we're respected, management says, you know what, that's great. We don't have to worry about that. We're going to move on to something else. So that only occurs if we have the respectability embedded within the organization. We'll talk a little bit about that, as how we actually gain that, but that is absolutely very important in terms of the process. But again, we are looked to from governance perspective, from from the audit committee. We're looked at from the perspective of senior management, as well as the department heads, in terms of a facilitator of change in regards to helping an area. Now, one of the things that I think is just absolutely fascinating and very, very good for the audit department is many times we'll go into a group and we'll identify issues. And the answer will be from the department head is that, yeah, we know we have a problem. We've just not been able to communicate this problem so that someone would actually listen to us. Well, when these issues are actually communicated in an audit report, it adds a much higher level of respectability to the problem, and in fact, we're able to facilitate change when change is actually very difficult to accomplish within many organizations. Okay, so we'll talk about respectability. And I can't overemphasize the fact that we as a profession, and I still consider myself an internal auditor, we as a profession have the ability to increase our professional appearance, our objectivity, our ability to actually mean something in an organization by our certifications. Okay? Now, many, if not most of you, are in the accounting program, get your CPA. Okay, and there's nothing that I'm going to tell you that should discourage you from that primary goal. Getting your CPA is absolutely critical. However, and this is the way I always describe it to my students, is once you've taken your CPA, is you have all of that testing knowledge bouncing around in your head. And the issue becomes is how do you actually, or what do you do with that information? Well, if you don't do anything with it, chances are you'll forget it. But what I strongly encourage you to do immediately after you've passed your CPA exam is to go back and get at least one additional certification. Now, to me, after I passed my CPA, the certification was the Certified Internal Auditor, the CIA. Okay? I also got what's called the CRMA, which is certification in risk management and assurances. But the two items together add a tremendous level of respectability within the internal audit department. And in most internal audit departments that I've worked, we've always encouraged and supported both financially and otherwise for staff to get the certifications. So the two certifications that I strongly recommend that you get after you get your CPA is, again, if we're talking, if you decide to move to a to the area of internal auditing absolutely is your CIA, is your CRMA, and we'll talk about some other certifications that are outside the IIA area, but are also highly respectable. There is a certification as an information system auditor, which is very good. You need to be cautious. There's hundreds of certifications out there. Many of them are absolutely worthless. They're just collecting your money. But there are certain certifications that are highly respected. And again, the CIA is highly respected in the internal audit profession, and in an internal audit group that has these certifications is going to be respected within the organization. There's no question about that. Now, a couple other things that you notice here is there's a certification in governmental auditing. I've worked in governmental auditing, and I've known a few people that have gotten their certification in governmental auditing. A little bit different than a CIA, and probably would not recommend that unless you are going to commit your career to government auditing, which if you decide to do that, that certainly is appropriate. Same thing with a financial services audit. You plan to work in a bank, this might be a very good thing. We'll talk later on in the course the certification in control self-assessment. It's actually very interesting, the control self-assessment process. Again, we're not going to talk about this tonight, but we will be talking about this later on. And then this last one here is the qualification in internal audit leadership. I'm actually not very familiar with this. I've never seen anyone that has this. I think this is actually a fairly new certification for internal audits. Okay, but in any event, the certifications actually absolutely add to your value as an internal auditor in an audit group. Adds to your value in terms of marketability, adds to your value from an audit perspective in terms of interacting with departments and leaders within the organization. And this is absolutely how we're able to create a profession out of internal audit, which you really want to do. This is a good thing. It's absolutely a good thing for your career. Going forward, it absolutely creates value for everyone. Okay, so let's go on and talk about a couple of other things. We're going to talk a little bit, and actually we'll go to the IIA webpage in a few minutes, in regards to the standards. And this is an example of the due professional care. As you notice that we have the attribute standard, the assurance service, with the third assurance standard. In this case, the 2 relates to the professional care, due professional care, and the 20 relates to for proficiency, and the 20 refers to the professional care. Okay, so why are we talking about this? Well, one of the things that you need to understand is that when you take the CIA exam, is that there's going to be the questions are really going to be related to the standards. So we're going to talk about the standards, but at this point, you need to understand that what we're looking at here is we're looking at a very structured nomenclature in regards to the overall standards for internal auditing. Okay, now I want to make a couple of comments here. Is what we have here is a comparison of assurance services and consulting services, okay? And you notice, and let's just kind of look through this. I'm going to talk about the assurance services first. In assurance services, internal audit is independent, okay? And so what do we mean by this? Well, as an example, we are auditing the auditee. So let's say the auditee is the purchasing department. Okay, so we're auditing the purchasing department, and we're also auditing and providing communication with the users of the purchasing department. But what's taking place here is we're looking at the overall process and we are remaining independent. So what do we mean by this? Is we identify issues, we make recommendations, but we don't actually implement these recommendations. So as an example, let's say one of the recommendations is that they develop a policy and procedure for creating purchase requisition. Okay, so that's the recommendation. But because we are the auditor and not the consultant, we would in fact allow or make the auditee make the changes, and then we can come back and we can audit these changes. So the issue in the assurance services is that we interact with management and we make recommendations, but it's actually management that is required to facilitate the changes that we are recommending. Once they've facilitated these changes, then we come back and we assess the implementation of our recommendations, and that's the process. Okay, so that's assurance services. Consulting services is where we come in and we make very specific recommendations, and in fact, we become a part of the change. So in a consulting service, we could in fact write the policy and procedure. No question about that. In an audit service, we would not be able to write the policy and procedure. I'll give you an example of this. Is one of the processes that I became involved with in one of our organizations was I became part of the committee in terms of implementing a new IT system for or a computerized purchase requisition system within the hospital. Okay, so there were probably 10 or 15 people that were part of the process, and I was one of the members. Now, as an auditor, I would make recommendations, but I would never make the changes. So I was basically the sounding board within this group in terms of making changes, and I was there to say, hey, wait a minute. Before you make this change, let's look at this from an internal control perspective and make sure that we have things like segregation of duties, make sure that we have some very specific processes in place. But it was not my role as an internal auditor to say, this is what we're going to do. Okay? Consulting services, if I worked on the same project as a consultant, is I would come in and I would say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and I would be a part of the change. An auditor is not a part of the change. He is relying on management to make the change, and then we come back and we audit these changes, and we're able to maintain a high level of independence. One of the things that actually is kind of interesting, and it's something that I strongly encourage you to take a look at, and it's the reason that we are using the II webpage and the new information, is that what the Institute of Internal Audits has done very recently has developed this new process of the internal controls. Okay, so the framework for internal control effectiveness. So we are looking at a mission, mandatory guidance, core principles, definitions, code of ethics, standards, implementation guide, and supplementary guide. Okay, so these are the standards for which we are going to be using. So for the next few minutes I want to actually go to the II webpage and point out a couple of things that I think are going to be very valuable to you as you are going through. So this is the framework for internal control effectiveness. And there's actually a video that you can watch here. But what we want to do is we want to get to know the framework. So when we go through this, what we're going to see is we're going to see the new guidance. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that actually I've downloaded into Blackboard. A couple of these. So what we have is we have the implementation guidelines, we have the practice advisory, and the practice guide. Now, one of the things that actually is very, very interesting is this concept, as you notice that the term here is GTAG. Okay, GTAG is a system that the IIA has put together, and these are primarily focused on IT issues. Now, we talk about IT. Let's just sort of make sure that we understand how important IT is to internal auditing. And in most organizations, not only do they have a internal audit group, but embedded in the internal audit group, or even a service group, is they have IT auditing. IT auditing is essentially looking at the exact same things that we're talking about: effectiveness, efficiency, compliance, assurance services, internal controls, but looking primarily from the perspective of IT. Okay? So what you'll see here is there's actually numerous what we call GTAG. So this is a GTAG in terms of continuous monitoring, and continuous monitoring is a wonderful thing for IT from an audit perspective. It's something that is sort of, we aspire to. In many cases, we don't actually get to the point where we're doing a continuous monitoring, but we get to the point where we're actually doing regular monitoring. And we'll be talking about this throughout this course. But the point that I really want to focus on is the guidance. So all of the guidance issues are here. And again, actually I don't have some of this information. I'm not exactly sure why I don't have that. I think this is only for the chief audit executives. One of the big things related to internal audit is the COSO framework. Now, if you've had internal auditing, or excuse me, external auditing, the class is we talk about COSO, the COSO framework of internal controls. The COSO framework of internal controls is embedded in everything that we do in relationship to internal audit. Okay, so we'll be talking about that. And then what we see here is the, so probably should not have put that. Here we go. This actually is something that you can buy. Or is it? What do we have? Okay, so no, it's purchased. You don't necessarily, I would not recommend that you buy this, but what we have here is basically everything that's in this book is going to come in these practice advisories. Okay, so the information is here. I am going to upload as much information as possible, but again, as I recommended, that from a student perspective, it's actually very cheap to sign up for the internal a student membership for internal auditing, and I think you're going to find this extremely valuable, not only for this class, but hopefully, and I sincerely believe that at the end of the semester, is you're going to look at internal auditing from the perspective of it being a tremendous career opportunity for you. Okay, so that's my spiel on internal auditing. I think we have a fairly good introduction. I think I covered the areas that I really wanted to cover. Just follow Blackboard. I'll be posting over the next day or two some other information. And by Friday, so you can get these extra credit points, is post your topic for your paper. And again, you may even want to just post a couple of sort of suggested topics. I'll work with you in the discussion in terms of narrowing it down. And once the person or two has sort of solidified what they're looking for, I think everyone else is going to look at that and they're going to say, oh, okay, now I understand what we're trying to do. Okay, so none of this is punishment. I tried to simplify this course as much as possible. You notice that we don't have any group discussions, which I found over the years that group discussions have been just extremely hard to manage in an online environment. So where can we get ideas for the paper? I'll post it in the book. Yeah, sure. In the book, frankly, it will amaze you how much information is on the internet. So if you get some ideas, just type it in to Google, and it will surprise you what you're going to see. But yeah, definitely, I would say the book to begin with. Just go through this, and again, I've given you a couple of ideas in terms of enterprise risk management, general controls audit. Start looking at those G tags in the IIA. I'll download a couple of them so you get a feel for what those are. I'd love to see a number of students focus on IT issues in regards to internal auditing, because again, you will find that IT is really driving a lot of things in internal auditing. And the great thing about internal auditing and IT, you don't necessarily have to be an IT expert. I certainly am not in most of the audits that I'm doing, and then I'm relying on other people that have expertise once I've gone beyond the scope of my limits. Okay, so there's a couple of ideas. I'll certainly post a couple of things. But again, start a discussion in the discussion board, and I think you'll find that by the end of it, we'll have some great ideas. Okay, so thank you very much for your time.